If someone had told me 10 years ago that Leo Vance would one day be asleep on my couch, his formidable frame barely contained by the worn floral cushions, I would have laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. Because 10 years ago, Leo Vance was the sun, and I was a planet in a forgotten orbit, content to watch his light from a safe, cold distance. He was my best friend Mark's older brother. A walking, talking thunderstorm of a man, all broad shoulders and easy laughter and a confidence that seemed to suck the very air from a room, leaving none for me. I didn't dislike him. Dislike would have been an act of emotion, a choice. What I felt for Leo was something far more passive and pathetic, a kind of gravitational awe. He existed on a plane I couldn't touch, a world of pickup trucks and calloused hands and casual girlfriend who all looked like they'd been plucked from a sun-drenched catalog. I was a creature of libraries and quiet corners, of paper dust and the hushed turning of pages. Our worlds didn't just fail to intersect. They were written in different languages. My routine was my armor. Wake at 6. Coffee black. Read for an hour. Work at the university archives from 8 to 4. Walk home. Dinner for 1. Another book. Sleep. It was a life built of carefully placed bricks, a fortress against the unpredictable chaos of feeling. And Leo Vance was the most unpredictable thing I knew. He was a force of nature I observed through the thick, shatterproof glass of my own making. I saw him at holidays mostly. Thanksgiving, Christmas, the occasional summer barbecue at the Vance family home. He'd be there, holding a beer, surrounded by people, his voice a low rumble in the cheerful cacophony. He'd nod at me. Noah, a simple acknowledgement. And I'd nod back. Leo, the full extent of our decade-long relationship, summed up in 2 names exchanged across a crowded lawn. I was Mark's quiet friend, the bookish one, an odd, silent fixture in the background of their boisterous family portrait. The distance between us was a canyon, carved by years of my own quiet observation and his complete, understandable indifference. He was the quarterback, and I was the kid in the library hiding from the pep rally. There was no animosity. There was just nothing. A void. A space I filled with a longing so secret, so deeply buried, it felt more like a fossil than a living thing. A relic of a boy I used to be, one who still believed in things like spontaneous connection. Then came the phone call that took a sledgehammer to my carefully constructed walls. It was Mr. Vance, Leo and Mark's father, a kind man with a gentle voice and eyes that always seemed to hold a genuine warmth for me. "Noah, my boy," he'd said, his voice strained over the line. "I apologize for calling you out of the blue like this. I'm in a bit of a bind." My heart did a nervous little stutter step. The Vances never called me. I was a satellite, not part of the main system. "It's Leo," he continued, and the world tilted. "He had that knee surgery this morning. The ACL thing he's been putting off. He's fine, he's home, but the boy's a stubborn mule. Insisted he didn't need anyone to stay." I pictured Leo, impossibly, laid low. It was like imagining a mountain deciding to take a nap. Unnatural. Your mother and I had to fly out to see her sister, Eleanor, in Oregon. It was an emergency, and Mark's on that geology trip in Utah. There's just nobody, and I know you live only a few blocks from him. The unspoken question hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. I wouldn't ask, but I'd sleep a lot better knowing someone was just checking in. Making sure he's eating something besides stale crackers, my solitude, my precious, guarded routine, was being threatened by the one person I was least equipped to handle. My throat was dry. My fortress was being politely invaded, and I, the gatekeeper, was powerless to stop it. How could I say no to this kind man? How could I explain that being in Leo Vance's personal space for more than 5 minutes would unravel a decade's worth of carefully woven composure? "Of course, Mr. Vance," I heard myself say, the words feeling foreign and slick in my mouth. "I'd be happy to happy." A bold-faced lie. I was terrified. The key was under the mat. Of course it was. Leo was not a man who worried about things like home security. His own physical presence was security enough. My hand trembled as I picked it up. It felt impossibly heavy, a small piece of metal that held the power to unlock a world I had only ever viewed from the outside. The apartment smelled like him. A clean, sharp scent of cedarwood soap and something else, something uniquely Leo. It was neater than I expected. Polished wood floors, a worn leather couch, a stack of National Geographic magazines on a simple coffee table. It was sparse, masculine, and quiet. The silence was the most shocking part. I had always associated him with noise. And there he was, sprawled on that leather couch, his long body looking cramped and awkward. One leg, the one I assumed was the surgical patient, was propped up on a mountain of pillows, encased in a bulky black brace. He was asleep. His face, usually set in lines of easy confidence or a playful smirk, was slack with exhaustion. The lines around his eyes were deeper than I'd ever noticed. A faint shadow of stubble darkened his jaw, and a small, white scar I'd never seen before cut through the arch of his right eyebrow. He looked human, breakable. The mythological creature from the Vance family barbecues was gone. In his place was just a man in pain, asleep in the afternoon light slanting through the blinds. My heart, that frantic trapped bird in my chest, beat a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. I was an intruder, a voyeur in this quiet, vulnerable space. I stood there for a full minute, just watching him breathe. The slow, even rise and fall of his chest under a simple gray t-shirt. I noticed the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. I noticed the sheer size of his hands, even relaxed in sleep, resting on his stomach. These are details I had no right to, observations gathered from a proximity I had never been granted. I retreated to the kitchen, my movements stiff and robotic. I opened the fridge. Beer, a carton of eggs, a half-empty bottle of ketchup. Mr. Vance was right. I found a pot, filled it with water, and set about making the soup I'd brought. The simple domestic task was a lifeline. Chop vegetables. Stir. Simmer. Focus on the mechanics. Don't think about the sleeping giant in the other room. What the hell are you doing in my apartment? The voice was a low growl, thick with sleep and pain. I jumped, dropping the ladle with a clatter that echoed in the silent apartment. I turned around slowly. Leo was awake. He had pushed himself up on his elbows, his eyes narrowed and clouded with confusion. "Your dad called me," I said, my own voice barely a whisper. He was worried. "He asked me to check on you." He stared at me, blinking slowly, as if trying to place me in his universe. "Noah." The way he said my name was a question, like he recognized the face, but couldn't compute its presence in his home. "Yeah," I said, my hands fidgeting, searching for a place to rest. "I made soup." I gestured vaguely toward the stove with my chin. It was the most pathetic peace offering in history. He grunted and fell back against the cushions, closing his eyes. A muscle in his jaw clenched and unclenched. The power dynamic, the one that had governed our entire non-relationship, was suddenly, shockingly gone. He was horizontal. I was vertical. He was in pain. I was making soup. It was a bizarre inversion of our roles. "Don't need a babysitter," he muttered, his voice muffled by the leather. "I know," I said softly. "Your dad was just worried." He didn't answer. I finished with the soup, ladling it into a bowl. I found a spoon, a glass of water, and a bottle of painkillers on the counter. I carried the makeshift tray over to the couch, my heart hammering. This was it, the moment of truth, entering his personal orbit. "Here," I said, setting the tray down on the coffee table. He opened his eyes and looked at the bowl, then at me. The suspicion was still there, but it was edged with something else. Weariness. He tried to sit up further and winced, a sharp intake of breath hissing through his teeth. "Easy," I said, acting on an impulse I didn't know I possessed. I reached out, my hand hovering awkwardly before I placed it gently on his shoulder to steady him. And that was it. The first touch. 10 years of distance obliterated by 5 fingers on a cotton t-shirt. His skin was hot beneath the fabric. I could feel the solid muscle, the sheer density of him. A jolt went through me, pure electricity, sharp and stunning. My mind went completely blank. All the noise, all the anxiety just ceased. There was only the heat of him under my palm. His head turned, his eyes locking with mine. They were a surprising shade of hazel, flecked with green and gold, and right now they were wide with a raw, unguarded vulnerability. The air crackled. The space between us shrank to nothing. I could smell the sleep on his breath, see the faint tremor in his hand as he reached for the glass of water. I snatched my hand back like I'd been burnt. My face was on fire. I took a clumsy step back, bumping into the arm of chair. "Sorry," I mumbled, staring at the floor. He didn't say anything. I could feel him watching me as he slowly, carefully picked up the spoon. The silence was a physical weight pressing down on me. I had trespassed. I had crossed a line that wasn't even marked on the map, and now we were both lost. The next few days fell into a strange, stilted rhythm. I would come over after work. I'd bring groceries, cook a simple meal. He would be on the couch, watching television with the volume low, his face a mask of stoic endurance. He was a terrible patient. He hated asking for help. I would watch him try to reach the remote control that had fallen on the floor, his jaw tight with frustration, before I would silently pick it up and hand it to him. He would mutter a thanks without looking at me. I learned the landscape of his apartment, the way the morning sun hit the floorboards. The titles of the books on his single shelf, histories, biographies, a surprising amount of poetry. I learned the sound of his breathing when he finally drifted off into a painkiller-induced sleep. I was a ghost in his house, and he was a fallen king. The power had shifted so completely it was dizzying. I, the observer, was now the caregiver, and he, the center of every room, was confined to 3 worn leather cushions. He started talking to me. Not much at first. Grunts of approval for the food. Questions about my day, delivered to the television screen. "How was the Dusty Book Factory?" he asked one evening. I blinked. "The archives." "Yeah." That he shifted his weight, hissing in a breath. "It was quiet," I said. "Someone donated a collection of 19th century letters. I'm cataloging them." He was quiet for a long moment. I thought he'd lost interest. "Then what are they about?" "A farmer writing to his brother who moved west. Crops, weather, loneliness." He turned his head and looked at me then. Really looked at me. The fog of pain in his eyes had cleared a little. "People have always been lonely." "Huh," he said, and it wasn't a question. It was a statement. A shared, sudden understanding that passed between us in the dim light of his living room. A small bridge built across a 10-year canyon. That night, the storm hit. It wasn't in the forecast. It came out of nowhere, a furious, violent thing that threw rain against the windows like handfuls of gravel. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the apartment into a thick, profound darkness. "Great," Leo's voice came out of the blackness, laced with a tired frustration. My heart was pounding. The sudden intimacy of the dark was suffocating. "I have a flashlight on my phone," I said, my voice sounding thin and reedy. I fumbled for it, my fingers clumsy. The beam cut a narrow, shaky path through the room, landing on Leo's face. He looked pale, spectral. He was watching me, his expression unreadable. "Pain's bad tonight," he said, his voice low and rough. He hadn't said a word about it all evening, but now, cloaked in darkness, the confession slipped out. "Did you take your pills?" I asked, my voice taking on a gentle tone I didn't recognize as my own. "An hour ago." Not touching it, I moved closer, drawn by a force I couldn't name. I sat on the edge of the coffee table, the phone's light casting our shadows, huge and distorted, on the wall behind us. The only sound were the rain and our breathing. "You know," he said, his voice so quiet I had to lean in to hear it. "For years, I thought you hated me." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "No, I don't hate you, Leo. You never look at me," he said. "At barbecues, holidays, you always look away. Like I'm too much you are," I screamed in my head. "You're too much. Too bright. Too loud. Too everything." "I'm not." I started, my throat closing up. "It's not you. I'm just quiet." "No, it's more than that." He shifted, trying to look at me more directly. "It's like you can't stand to be in the same room with me." His voice was raw, stripped of all its usual bravado. It was just the voice of a man lying in the dark, hurting, and something inside me broke. A dam I'd spent my entire adult life constructing brick by careful brick. The truth came pouring out, a torrent I was powerless to stop. "It's because I can't breathe when I'm in the same room with you," I whispered into the darkness. The The silence that followed was absolute. The rain, his breathing, my own frantic heartbeat, it all faded away. There was only the weight of my confession hanging in the air between us. I had said it. I had given voice to the fossil, and now it was alive, and it was going to destroy me. He was the one who moved first. He reached out, his hand finding mine in the dark. His fingers were warm and strong, his palm calloused. He laced his fingers through mine. It wasn't like the accidental brush of our hands days before. This was deliberate. An anchor. Noah, he breathed, and his voice was thick with an emotion I couldn't decipher. I couldn't speak. I could only hold his hand, my thumb stroking over his knuckles in a gesture of pure, unthinking instinct. He pulled gently on my hand. An invitation. I moved from the coffee table, sinking to my knees on the floor beside the couch. The phone had fallen from my other hand, its beam now pointing at the ceiling, casting the room in a soft, indirect glow. I could see his face now, his eyes dark and wide, searching mine. "I'm not good at this," he whispered, his gaze dropping to my mouth. Words, feelings mean neither, I managed to choke out. He lifted his other hand, the one that wasn't holding mine, and cupped my jaw. His thumb brushed against my lower lip. It was the softest touch I had ever known. A question, a plea. I leaned into his hand, closing my eyes, and that was all the answer he needed. He drew me forward, slowly, hesitantly. The first kiss was not a crash of lightning, but the quiet, inevitable meeting of two shores after a long, slow tide. It was soft. It was searching. His lips were chapped and tasted faintly of salt and the painkillers he'd taken. There was the rough scrape of his stubble against my skin, a sensory detail so vivid it imprinted itself on my soul. It was a kiss of profound, staggering honesty. It wasn't about passion. It was about recognition. "Oh, there you are. I've been waiting." When we finally broke apart, we just stayed there, our foreheads resting against each other. His hand was still on my jaw, mine still tangled with his. The storm raged outside, but in the small, dark space of his apartment, there was a perfect, fragile calm. I had stepped off a cliff, and instead of falling, I had been caught. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Time had dissolved. Eventually, the exhaustion of the day, the week, the decade, caught up with me. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, I was blinking against the pale morning light. My neck was stiff. I was still on the floor, slumped against the couch, my head resting on a cushion near his hip. My hand was still holding his. He was asleep. His face was turned towards me, peaceful in the dawn. The harsh lines of pain were gone. He looked younger. For a moment, a wave of impossible tenderness washed over me. I watched the slow flutter of his eyelashes, the slight parting of his lips. I had spent the night in Leo Vance's apartment. I had kissed him. He had held my hand while I slept. It was a fantasy so ludicrous I had never even dared to imagine it. And then the fear crept in, a cold, slithering thing that wrapped itself around my stomach. What have you done? It was the meds, the storm, the darkness. It wasn't real. He was vulnerable, and I had taken advantage. He would wake up and be disgusted. He would remember who I was, Mark's weird, quiet friend, and he would push me away. The shame was a physical taste in my mouth, coppery and vile. I gently, carefully extracted my hand from his. His fingers twitched, but he didn't wake. I got on my feet, my joints protesting. I couldn't be here when he woke up. I couldn't face the regret, the pity in his eyes. I grabbed my jacket, scribbled a hasty, cowardly note. Had to get to work. Leftovers in the fridge. Call if you need anything. And I fled. I didn't just leave his apartment. I ran from it, as if the hounds of hell were at my heels. The silence that followed was worse than any I had ever known. My own quiet apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison cell. Every tick of the clock was a judgment. Every silent meal was a punishment. The solitude I had so carefully cultivated was now an agonizing void, filled with the ghost of his touch, the memory of his whisper in the dark. One day passed, then two. My phone remained silent. The note had been clear. Call if you need anything. He didn't need anything. He didn't need me. The spiral of my thoughts was vicious. I had misread everything. It was a moment of weakness for him, a lifetime of foolish longing for me. I had projected my own desperate fantasy onto him, and he had been too kind or too medicated to shut it down in the moment. The recoil was his real answer. The silence was his rejection. I went to work. I cataloged the dead farmer's lonely letters. I ate my solitary dinners. I tried to rebuild the walls, but my hands shook too much. The bricks wouldn't set. The mortar was mixed with memory and regret. I was a ruin. He had walked into my life for 3 days and left me in absolute shambles. On the third day, I was sitting on my couch, staring at a book I hadn't turned a page of in an hour, when there was a knock on my door. My heart stopped. It couldn't be. It was probably a delivery, a neighbor, anyone but him. I didn't move. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. With a sense of grim inevitability, I got up and walked to the door. I looked through the peephole, and the air left my lungs in a painful rush. It was him. Thou. He was standing in my hallway, leaning heavily on a pair of crutches. His hair was a mess. He was wearing sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt. He looked exhausted and hunted. He had dragged himself, on his freshly operated-on knee, 3 blocks to my apartment. I opened the door. We just stared at each other for a long moment. He looked even bigger and more out of place in the narrow hallway of my building than he did in his own apartment. "Can I?" he started, gesturing vaguely inside with his head. "This is harder than it looks." I stepped back, holding the door open. He maneuvered himself through the doorway with a clumsy, painful-looking shuffle. He made it to the center of my small living room and stood there, leaning on the crutches, looking lost. "You ran," he said, his voice quiet. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. "You were asleep," I said, my own voice a pathetic whisper. I had to get to work. The lie was thin and brittle. He shook his head, a small, tired movement. "No, you ran." He looked around my apartment, and my neat stacks of books, my single armchair, my life built for one. "I woke up and you were gone. I thought I dreamed it. My heart ached." "It wasn't a dream, I know," he said, his eyes finally meeting mine. They were filled with a desperate, frantic emotion that mirrored my own. "Which is why when you didn't come back, when you didn't answer my text." "What text?" I blurted out. I fumbled for my phone. It had died sometime yesterday. I never let my phone die. My perfect routine shattered. "Noah," he said, and his voice was so full of weary frustration it was almost a sob. I freaked out. "Okay." I woke up, and the sun was shining, and everything was real, and it scared the hell out of me. He took a clumsy step closer, his face earnest, pleading. I don't do that. I don't feel that. Especially not with a guy. My whole life has been a straight line. Simple. Easy. And then you with your damn soup and your quiet company. You walked in and tied the whole thing in a knot. I just stared at him, unable to form a single word. He was scared. Leo Vance, the thunderstorm, was scared. And he was scared of feeling the same way I did. "I pushed you away," he continued, his voice cracking. "When I woke up that morning, my first thought was that I had to get rid of you. Had to put things back the way they were. It was a reflex. A stupid, cowardly reflex. And the second you were gone, the second the door closed, all I felt was wrong. The silence in my apartment was too loud. It's never been too loud before." He looked down at the floor, his shoulders slumping. "These past 2 days have been the longest of my life. I kept waiting for you to come back. And you didn't. And I realized I did exactly what I was afraid you would do. I ran first." He looked up at me again, his hazel eyes shining with unshed tears. "I don't know what this is, Noah. I have no idea what I'm doing. But I know that I don't want it to stop. I don't want you to stop." The silence stretched between us, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of fear and hope and a terrifying, beautiful vulnerability. I crossed the room in 3 steps and gently took one of the crutches from him, leaning it against the wall. Then I took the other. He swayed slightly, and I put my hands on his arms to steady him. He was so warm, so solid, so real. "My place is too big," he whispered, his hands coming to rest on my waist. "Too empty." He didn't need to say anything else. I understood. He wasn't just talking about his apartment. He leaned down and kissed me again. This time There was no hesitation. It was a kiss of relief, of homecoming. It was desperate and deep, and it tasted of apology and promise. I wrapped my arms around his neck, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a spinning world. He stayed. He took the couch, refusing to even consider my bed, insisting his knee needed the elevation. But the geography of it didn't matter. He was here. His presence filled my small apartment, changing its very nature. The silence was no longer empty. It was peaceful. My routine, once a rigid defense, became a flexible framework that could now accommodate another person. The mornings were the most jarring in the best possible way. I'd wake up to the sound of him moving around in the kitchen. I'd walk out to find this huge, beautiful man, leaning on one crutch, trying to manage my coffee maker. He made the space feel both impossibly crowded and perfectly safe. He'd turn and smile, a real, unguarded smile that reached his eyes, and the world would just settle. Morning, he'd grumble, and it was the best sound I'd ever heard. We talked. We really talked. We unspooled years of misunderstandings. He told me he'd always been drawn to my stillness, that he mistook my shyness for disapproval. He confessed that he felt like a clumsy oaf around me, all rough edges and loud noises, and that my quiet intelligence had always intimidated him. He thought I judged him. I told him the truth, that I wasn't judging him. I was worshiping him from afar, that his energy didn't annoy me. It mesmerized me, that I had been half in love with him for a decade, a hopeless, secret ache I never thought would be answered. We laid our ghosts to rest, one quiet confession at a time. One afternoon, he handed me a key. It was a copy of his apartment key, the one I had used just a week before, feeling like a thief. Just in case, he said, not looking at me, or for whenever. I closed my hand around the cool metal. It was more than a key. It was a promise, an admission, a tangible piece of our new reality. It was him giving me a permanent place in his world, a world I never thought I'd be allowed to enter. When his knee was better, he didn't leave. We fell into a new life, a shared one. We alternated between his spacious, quiet apartment and my small, book-filled one. We learned each other's rhythms. I learned that he snored, but only when he was on his back. He learned that I couldn't sleep without reading for at least 30 minutes. He started reading the books I left on the nightstand. I started listening to the loud, obnoxious rock music he loved and found myself humming along. We built a world together in the quiet moments. Making dinner, our bodies brushing past each other in the kitchen. Lying on the couch, my head on his chest, his arm a heavy, comforting weight around me. The sound of his heartbeat a steady drum beneath my ear. Waking up in the middle of the night and reaching for him, just to find him already there. Solid. Real. He was the plot twist I never saw coming. The storm that tore down my fortress and showed me that the open sky was more beautiful than any wall I could ever build. He didn't just enter my life. He rearranged it, took all my quiet, solitary pieces, and showed me how they could fit with his. I had spent so long believing that love was a grand, dramatic event. But it wasn't. It was this, the quiet, steady, breathtaking piece of making coffee for two instead of one. It was looking across a room and meeting the eyes of the person who knew your every secret and loved you anyway. It was the end of a long, lonely vigil and the beginning of a quiet, shared dawn.